Most documentaries and books tell us that in 1946, Vito Genovese avoided prison and possibly the electric chair when a key witness against him was murdered by poisoning in his cell the year before. But there are arguments that suggest that the truth is far less exciting than the story that the Luciano crime family demonstrated its power by having a witness whacked whilst in his Brooklyn jail cell. Let's check it out. Welcome to OC Shorts, bringing you detailed historical snapshots of the American Mafia and other organised crime. Feel free to subscribe if you like that sort of thing. Today we're going to take a quick look at the death of Peter LaTempa, which resulted in mob powerhouse Vito Genovese avoiding a trip to see old Sparky. In 1934, Luciano family heavyweights Vito Genovese and Michele Mike Miranda scammed a merchant out of $160,000, reportedly through a crooked card game. The out-of-pocket merchant knew better than to moan about being duped, especially to a man who was reported to have been the underboss to Charlie Luciano at the time, and he sensibly just swallowed his losses. However, Ferdinand the Shadow Boccia, the man who brought the scam opportunity to Miranda and Genovese, kept pestering the pair for his $35,000 cut. As Anthony DeFeo writes in his excellent book on Genovese, Boccia's behaviour is comparable to that of Marty Krugman bothering Jimmy Burke for his share of the Lufthansa heist. DeFeo wrote, "The constant demands of Krugman on heist mastermind James Burke for a cut of the robbery led to Krugman's disappearance." Anyway, Miranda and Genovese decided to do away with Boccia, a man who had only brought them the score to get back in Vito's good graces after he had held up Anthony Tony Bender Strollo and robbed him of $5,800. Strollo, a made man, was close with Vito Genovese. Miranda and Genovese enlisted Ernest the Hawk Rupolo to assist in killing Boccia and his accomplice in the Strollo robbery, William Gallo. Mike Miranda wanted Rupolo to set up Gallo and Boccia so they could be killed by gangsters Gus Frasca and George Smura, but Rupolo volunteered to do the killing himself. Rupolo later recalled that Vito Genovese had said that Boccia was a cokey bastard and that Gallo was a pimp bastard. Rupolo was then told to wait for orders from Peter DeFeo, a future Genovese captain and powerhouse down Mulberry Street. In the end, it was decided that Gus Frasca and George Smuro would be the ones to kill Boccia, which they did at the Circolo Cristofo Club and Cafe on the 19th of September. Ernest the Hawk Rupolo was tasked with killing William Gallo, with Mike Miranda adding that he wanted him doused in gasoline and set on fire after he'd shot him. However, the Hawk was less successful in carrying out his contract. After wining and dining Gallo in Coney Island, alongside Rupolo's associate Rosario Soli Palmieri, the Hawk pulled out his gun and fired 3 shots at William Gallo. The gun misfired each time. The shocked Gallo asked what the hell was going on, to which Rupolo jokingly told him, "I was only kidding." Later that evening, and after oiling his gun at a friend's house, Rupolo and Palmieri pulled their weapons and shot at the inebriated William Gallo. They fired 9 times but missed a few shots. However, Gallo went down. The next day, Ernest the Hawk Rupolo met up with Mike Miranda, who informed the Hawk that Gallo was still alive, and he was angry that Rupolo hadn't set Gallo on fire as instructed. After a couple of weeks of hiding up in Springfield, Massachusetts, Rupolo returns to New York City, where he is promptly arrested. He is escorted to Kings County Hospital, where he is fingered by the wounded Gallo. Gallo says to Ernie, "Why did you shoot me?" Ernie's response is, "Why did you tell on me?" Gallo remonstrates, "But that ain't the question I'm asking you." To which Rupolo replies, "What's the difference what I shot you for? You could get revenge later on, instead of talking, saying I shot you." So Gallo recovers, and Ernest the Hawk Rupolo gets sentenced to 12 to 20 years for assault and attempted murder. But he keeps his mouth shut about who ordered the hit. 2 years later, in 1936, and the authorities are closing in on Vito Genovese, Mike Miranda, Gus Frashka, George Smera, and Peter DeFeo for their involvement in the Boccia killing. All the men decide to go on the lam, with Vito Genovese famously heading to Italy, and then shortly after, Mike Miranda heads in the same direction to join him. Nearly a decade later, and in 1942, Ernest the Hawk Rupolo is released after serving 8 years and 6 months for his attempt on William Gallo's life. He went back to his old ways and took a $500 contract to kill Carl Sparacino, a man who'd been robbing mob dice games. But on April the 17th, 1944, Rupolo failed again, and despite hitting Sparacino in the face and neck, Sparacino survived. Rupolo was picked up again, and this time, and perhaps angered by the fact that Genovese and Miranda were still free over in Italy, he decided to talk about what he knew on various crimes, including the 1934 murder of Ferdinand the Shadow Boccia. Which is where we come to Peter LaTempa. Peter LaTempa was an associate of the Luciano crime family, and Rupolo has told the authorities that LaTempa had heard Genovese and Miranda talking with him about killing Boccia. The police went and picked up LaTempa on July the 5th, 1944, and he was allegedly pressurized into corroborating Rupolo's version of events. On August the 6th, 1944, Vito Genovese and Mike Miranda, plus the others, are indicted for the Ferdinand Boccia murder. Now over in Italy, and as most of you are aware, Vito Genovese initially sided with Benito Mussolini, but then switched sides to the Allied forces, and was even running a black market racket involving stolen army goods. He is arrested by US military police on August 27th, 1944. Army intelligence officer Sergeant Orange Dickey then prepares to have Genovese return to New York after he digs into his history a bit more and finds out about the indictment for the murder of Boccia. It is at this point that one of the most famous mafia myths is born. As mentioned before, most books and documentaries suggest that the Luciano crime family used its considerable power to have witness Peter LaTempa poisoned whilst in his secure Brooklyn jail. An autopsy famously saying that LaTempa had consumed enough drugs to kill 8 horses. Making of the Mob, the fun but often inaccurate docudrama, even shows Frank Costello plotting with Charlie Luciano to help out Vito. However, according to both Anthony DiStefano's excellent biography on Vito Genovese, as well as some work carried out by mafia historian Andy Peatpiece, the death of Peter LaTempa is less impressive. A point that is often overlooked is that before his death, on January 16th, 1945, Peter LaTempa attempted to hang himself in his Brooklyn civil jail the month before, on December the 6th, 1944. Historian Andy Peatpiece suggests that perhaps LaTempa had got word that Genovese was due back home in New York, pending his deportation from Italy. It is also known that on January the 15th, Peter LaTempa, while out on a walk accompanied by a guard, stopped off at a drugstore. The following day, Peter LaTempa is found dead in his cell, and word spread quickly that the mob had poisoned him. In fact, it is believed that LaTempa had been hoarding sleeping pills given to him by his brother on visits, and then purchased more on his drugstore visit the day before his suicide. It may appear that Peter LaTempa decided to take his own life rather than wait and see what Vito Genovese had in store for him on his return to New York. Anyway, as history shows us, when Vito Genovese was brought to trial a year later, the lack of corroborating witness to Rupolo's testimony was enough to see Vito Genovese set free for ordering the Ferdinand Boccia hit. Judge Leibovitz, who presided over the trial, told Vito Genovese, "You are always just one step ahead of Sing Sing and the electric chair. I cannot speak for the jury, but I believe that even if there was a shred of corroborating evidence, you would have been condemned to the chair." As for Mike Miranda, he'd been watching events from Italy, and 3 months after Vito Genovese was set free, he turned himself in to a Brooklyn police station in September 1946. After spending 5 months inside, the prosecutor went to Judge Leibovitz and asked for any murder charges against Big Mike to be dismissed. Following this, Gus Frashka and George Smura also turned themselves in and eventually had all charges against them dismissed as well. As for Peter DeFeo, he decided to stay on the run a while longer. In 1949, Ernest the Hawk Rupolo appeared in court awaiting to be freed on his attempted murder of Carl Sparacino. He'd been promised leniency for testifying against Genovese. Judge Leibovitz said to him, "The underworld neither forgives nor forgets. If I let you go, you will be murdered as sure as you are standing here. As an underworld squealer, it even was necessary to keep you in solitary these last 3 years. What do you want me to do?" Rupolo responded, "Let me go. I'm willing to take my chances." Leibovitz granted Rupolo's wishes. 15 years later, on August 24, 1964, the body of Ernest the Hawk Rupolo was found floating in the waters off Breezy Point at the entrance to Jamaica Bay, Queens. His hands were bound and a concrete block tied to his feet. If any of you are interested in checking out the Anthony DeStefano book on Vito Genovese, I put a link to it in the description and the comments, so you can check it out for yourselves. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.